Good evening, and thank you all for coming tonight. What I'd like to do is give you a little brief history of how the designated hitter came about in the world of professional baseball. Now, I know that that term designated hitter and even professional baseball can be confusing to some, so let me start by giving you a brief history of the game of baseball and how it came about. Now, back in the 1830s, there was a gentleman by the name of Abner Doubleday, and he is largely considered responsible for the invention of the game that we now appreciate today. Now, it's widely disputed whether or not he was actually the gentleman who created the game, and most believe it may have actually come from some English folk games or games played in small towns in Northeast America. But nevertheless, the way that the game came about was largely framed on ideas that were created over time and that have now come into what is now considered professional baseball that was started back in the 1870s. And in the 1870s, this is when it became professional baseball, was largely because those are people who were paid to play the game of baseball. So let me give you a brief understanding as to basically how this came about and what has now been created into two different leagues in the professional baseball. There's an American League and a National League, and I want you to hold on to that because that's going to become very important later in my conversation and discussion with you as to why those two leagues matter as it relates to the designated hitter. Now, the first is the rules of baseball. To understand why there is hitters and why there's a designated hitter, I want you to understand what the rules are. Baseball is played with 9 players on each team. There's a home team, the team where the team is playing at their field, and there's a visitors team, a team that comes in to play against them. The home team is the team that goes out into the field. They're called defensive players, and there are 9 people who are positioned among the field to play different positions. Some are further away from where the action is, some are a little bit closer. And when there are the 9 people in the field playing defensive positions, there is one person from the other team, the visiting team, who is considered the batter. He is the one who has a bat, a wooden stick, and he gets up there as the pitcher, the one who has the ball in his hand. The pitcher will throw that ball towards a base, home plate, and that batter is the one who swings and tries to hit that ball. Obviously, he wants to hit it as far as he can so that none of the defensive players can actually field that ball. As he hits the ball, there are 3 bases around in a diamond shape. His objective is to go to each one of those bases and then try and make it back to the home base, the base where he started at, which is considered a run. The more runs you get at the completion of a game, then the team with the most runs would win. Now, what the defensive team is trying to do is get that batter out, the one who is trying to hit the ball. If he hits the ball and one of the defensive players fields and catches that ball before it hits the ground, that batter is out. And when there are 3 outs, when 3 batters come to the plate and those 3 batters get out, then that would then force the teams to change places, and the visiting team would now go into the field and take those 9 defensive positions, and the home team would now put a batter up. So that is the basic rules of baseball. Well, as baseball started to progress into the early 1900s, it became very obvious that pitchers, the ones who are throwing the ball, trying to get that batter out, were becoming much, much, much better at pitching. But because they spent so much time trying to hone their skills as pitchers, they weren't doing a really good job of practicing their batting skills. And so when they got up to the plate to bat, they were largely just swing and a miss, swing and a miss, swing and a miss. And after 3 strikes, they were out. And it became almost a routine play for a batter to go up to a pitcher to bat and for that pitcher to get out. So it was proposed even back in the early 1900s that they try and come up with a way for pitchers not to have to bat. And basically in 1973, it was voted on by the American League. Remember how I mentioned there were 2 different leagues, an American League and a National League. The American League decided and voted that, you know what, we don't want the pitchers to bat anymore because it is basically an automatic out. And we want to have someone go in and hit for that pitcher, but leave the pitcher in the game to be able to pitch. And that position became known as the designated hitter. Now, as a result of the designated hitter, those individuals are much more skilled at batting. They are much better at hitting balls than they are throwing or maybe even fielding balls in a defensive position. And so what they have found is that the runs in the American League, the teams that play in the American League of Baseball, are scoring more runs. And if this has become a little bit more fan festivities because they like to see runs scored, whereas the National League, the league in which they did not vote for the passage of a designated hitter, where the pitchers will still bat, has not imposed that rule. So in conclusion, what I think we'll find here is that the designated hitter, while it's still controversial, and there are still two different professional leagues in America that either employ or don't employ that rule, have varying reasons for why that makes sense. The American League has shown a much higher productivity in runs, where there is an increase in the fan base. As I said, fans like to come out and watch games more frequently when there are more runs scored. In addition, some of those designated hitters are ball players who may be a little bit older in their careers. They may not have the ability to be able to run as fast or to field balls or even to throw, but their batting is still really sound. And because of that, they are able to play in longer careers. And I think this is another thing where fans have become more in tune to watching their ball players play. They like to go see those players who are those individuals who stick around longer and have a following of the fans. So that is the basic rules of baseball. That is a basic understanding as to how the designated hitter rule came into being. If there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to address those.